Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer with a new video looking at the fate of the next console generation. If you've seen my videos before, this is a bit of a departure from what I normally do, but I did want to make a video in response to a recent discussion that was posted by IGN back on January 28th. Further, the Call of Duty footage in the background is merely for your entertainment while I address the aforementioned topic. I don't claim to be the greatest Call of Duty player, and it's just some footage I had laying around, and I figure I would use it basically as a cover for the discussion that I wanted to have. So now without further ado, let's get started. Recently, IGN.com, as I said earlier, posted a video and several video game analysts looking at the future of console gaming. There's some apparently in the gaming industry who seem to believe that the era of the console is over, and that was the topic for discussion. It was about a 20-minute long video. If you haven't seen it, check out the link in the description. The general discussion ended up coming down to mobile gaming undercutting the next generation of consoles and endangering the PS4 and Xbox 720's success. It also did briefly touch on free-to-play gaming, but really it seemed like most of the analysts wanted to talk about how things like the iPad and iPhone would prevent the next generation from succeeding. The consensus, I think there were four individuals in the discussion, the consensus seemed to be that the next generation of consoles would have difficulty convincing gamers to buy them because users would rather buy mobile games on iPads, iPhones, and other mobile devices rather than shelling out $50 or so or $60 for a console game. And also the cost of potentially upgrading, being several $100s. The analysts seemed puzzled about how the new consoles would brand themselves and therefore convince players to buy the games and the consoles. What I think the discussion entirely failed to mention, though, is the new element to gaming that didn't exist until rather recently, actually. The gaming community, in a sense of community that's really formed around commentators on things like YouTube, online gaming sites like Major League Gaming, and a whole host of other ways that gamers connect. Xbox Live being one, PlayStation Network being another. Basically ways that gamers kind of come to identify with the gaming community and become a part of the gaming community in a way that wasn't possible in the past. Businesses have really always attempted to succeed by building their own brand, but the idea of promoting a brand has really taken off in the tech age. This is no different in the gaming community, and YouTube's really created a way for games and consoles to brand themselves in ways that were really not possible previously. The previous version of consoles, despite perhaps being the most successful run of consoles ever, never had the online element that exists today. Sure, they had the ability to play online gaming, but they lacked the community appeal. PC gaming is in a similar place as consoles now, although PC gaming has had, I would say, a stronger online experience. Online gaming, at least in my experience, started stronger on the PCs, with things like Medal of Honor or Allied Assault being very popular online. It wasn't until the last 3 years or so, though, that online video game commenting has become mainstream, and the industry is still taking form. This is important because it creates more interconnected gaming communities than existed in the past. There have been numerous studies in various industries that show customers are willing to spend substantially more if they feel invested in the business or product that they're purchasing. This is something that the analysts completely ignored. There have been numerous studies that have shown if you feel a personal connection to that company, to that brand, you will be willing to spend substantially more money to promote that product or to get that product over a cheaper product, which maybe is even better, but you don't feel that connection to. The online gaming community creates this connection and community. As a result, it's easier today than ever for gaming consoles to create gamers who would be considered hardcore supporters. In the past, those supporters existed. There's no doubt that there were large numbers of Nintendo and Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis supporters. They were huge. But I don't think if you took a number standpoint, you could compare the numbers. It wouldn't even be close. Actually, if you look at the previous generation of consoles, with the exception of the most recent one with PlayStation 2 and Xbox, before that, all the other previous console releases really didn't sell nearly as well as even the PlayStation 3 and Xbox have. Super Nintendo, for all its success, only sold about 50 million units, whereas PlayStation 3 has sold over 70 million, Xbox has sold over 70 million, and Wii sold over 90 million. So I do think there's a dynamic there, or at least an audience there that is much larger than it used to be, and I would say that it's largely responsible for things like YouTube and Xbox Live and PlayStation Network. Millions of people all over the internet regularly are viewing gaming videos and commentaries every day. This means that there is a base beyond just the traditional fanboys who'd be more willing to and likely to purchase the next generation consoles than previous console refreshes. The fact that IGN talking heads left out this element entirely, to me, underscores a misunderstanding between the way many execs and analysts look at the gaming community and, well, the facts of the industry today. It's true that many casual gamers adopt for cheap games that work just over flashy games, and thus mobile gaming does pose a long-term threat. There's no doubt it's more convenient to take your phone or your tablet with you than it is to bundle up your PlayStation and take a TV with you somewhere. But ignoring the community that surrounds these consoles and has built up even stronger over the past few years seems to me to ignore the potential these new consoles may see. I think it's safe to say cheap mobile gaming may cut into sales somewhat, and already is to a certain extent, but it isn't ending consoles as they exist just yet. Platforms like the iPhone, iPad, or Android do not yet have a viable control system for fast-paced games. I'm sure someone's going to jump in on me and say that, Gameloft has a controller for the iPad, which they do, or a few other controllers out there, but the user interface just isn't up to the point of being able to replace console gaming. And even if the tech is out there to do it, it isn't in the public consciousness yet, and would still need to build a brand of its own for people to start buying it in large numbers. I also think that while you can hook up a lot of these tablets and phones to your TV, most people are not doing that yet for one reason or another. Maybe people don't want to fiddle with cords, maybe the technology isn't perfect yet, maybe upscaling it to a bigger screen just doesn't look as nice. I mean, there's a lot of big factors there, but the fact is people aren't taking their iPad from one home to another home, hooking it up to a TV and playing games. It's just not happening yet. I think it's safe to say mobile gaming represents a bigger threat to the mobile gaming platforms, like the Nintendo 3DS or PlayStation Vita, than they do to full-fledged consoles themselves. And you could easily argue the newest platforms are failing to a certain extent because of tablets and phones becoming more powerful. That being said, the new generation of consoles is going to jump ahead quite a bit substantially in terms of hardware, and I don't think you're going to see the iPad or any other devices catch up to them for at least 2 or 3, probably more years. But if you go incredibly aggressive and say that they're, the technology jump is going to continue, and you're going to see, hex core processors. They still need to work out some mobile chip issues. A dual core on a mobile chip isn't nearly as powerful as a dual core on a computer or a console. But still, you could certainly say that, if everything goes well for mobile development and they figure out a way to keep battery life manageable, that you could have serious competition. I still think it's 3, 4, probably more years away, and by that time the consoles are already going to be entrenched and established. The first 2, 3 years of the new console is what's going to make whether that console succeeds or not necessarily the first couple of weeks. Although that is always obviously the most high-profile period of time. The IGN video seems to think that these consoles will fail, and that they'll be followed up by some universal box licensed out to many companies, creating essentially one mega console, sort of the way the Blu-ray works, where multiple tech companies agreed upon a standard and everyone builds multiple versions of the same thing that are all interchangeable. I think there's a very real possibility that may well happen in time when an industry standard such as Blu-ray, as I already said, came about. It's even possible that the Steam box is going to be the first look of what that may look like, where they're talking about having multiple versions of the Steam box, high, middle, low end, something like that. And it certainly could be a glimpse into the future, but I don't think gamers and the gaming community are really ready for that yet. And I don't think the next generation of consoles will struggle as much as the commentators seem to think, because, as I said, there really is a community that's built up around it. Casual gamers won't rush out to buy it the first day, but if you get an established base out there of PlayStation and Xbox supporters, you can become a successful console over time. As you sell more units and your price eventually drops, you're going to get into the hands of more casual gamers. And I think that's the important thing that's being left out, is that hardcore element is far larger for these consoles than in the past. And I would argue some of the reasons for the Wii U's struggle is that Wii really never took hold from a commentator standpoint for online gaming the way that PlayStation and Xbox have, where you have millions of people basically following, people who play games online. It might not be, tons of titles that are succeeding. They did mention the failure in the IGN video. They did mention the failure of THQ, which had made quite a few hits. And I would say that the bigger threat to the gaming companies with these next consoles is the cost associated with developing for more and more advanced software. It's not so much the unit sales that I would be concerned about, so much as how many units of a game, not of a system, but how many units of a game have to be sold to essentially make money back or break even. The fortunate thing is, with so many people who won't upgrade right away, you can create a lot of games that'll be ported back and forth. It's why you typically don't see the full potential of a console unlocked until, it's well out and the old games fade away. For the first couple of years, they're still going to be making lots of games for PS3 and Xbox that are going to be ports for the newer consoles. Sports games are going to be probably the most common there, and it really wouldn't, I don't believe it would take that much to port a football game to all the other consoles. They already do it. And it's certainly something that I would expect to see continue. I think it's safe to say the next generation of consoles might not sell the 240 million units combined that the most recent one has already sold, but I also don't think it needs to keep keep console gaming strong. You could well see PS4 and Xbox sell 50 million units each rather than the 70 million they've sold so far, and I think it would still be a successful console run. The console AAA market may indeed shrink somewhat if the industry contracts, but Sega and Super Nintendo only sold a combined 80 million units roughly, and they did just fine. Granted, systems and hardware have gotten a lot more expensive since back then, but I think the point stands: the gaming community today, and the hardcore gaming community today, is far larger than it ever was in the past. And as I said, these online communities through Xbox and as the already aforementioned systems are going to make these communities stay strong and stay invested in these future consoles. While I do think it's possible that the mainstream might have some viable alternatives in years to come, I don't see many people replacing PS4s or Xboxes with iPads for several years yet. Mobile platforms are simply not powerful enough and won't be due to the pending console relaunch, and the communities have built up to a point where they're so strong and loyal that the console market will stay strong for several more years, thanks in large part to community engagement. The threat to consoles as we know it would likely be in the younger generation of gamers, many of whom are growing up on mobile games. But those individuals who are gaming primarily on mobile from the start have only been around for 3 to 5 years so far, if even. The iPad is still so new, it hasn't been able to build its own generation of people who have used that more exclusively. And it's many years away from being able to do that. They're not going to be able to replace the large percentage of customers who still view gaming in a console frame and not in a iPad frame. Most people who get iPads or tablets certainly game on them, or many people do, and many people are gamers who game on them. But just because you game on one device doesn't mean you're not going to game on another. The iPad was the most requested gift this year for Christmas. So the idea that the commentators are throwing out there that essentially, people aren't going to be willing to spend $400 or $500 on these new systems, to me seems flawed when, the cheapest version of the full-size iPad is, $499, $599, and then it goes up from there. I don't think, and the other thing is to think that, yeah, sure, consoles weren't the most requested gift, and I don't know if they ever have been, but that being said, they're 8 years old now. When you get a new console to come out, sure, that's going to jump up. That's going to get a lot more gifts. That's going to get a lot more requests. I think the problem that the Wii U is having, which I don't think Xbox or PS3 will have, is it was never a breaking edge technology. The Wii sold incredibly well because it was very innovative with the motion controls. Everyone else has that now. There really wasn't a whole lot of innovation with the Wii U. The controller was kind of unique. It was kind of fidgety. You could call it gimmicky. But other than that, the specs jump wasn't huge. The number of games available at launch wasn't huge. And they still sold, over 1 million copies so far. I don't know if it'll end up being a success. I think they were probably a bit naive to expect Wii-like success, because in many people's eyes it wasn't a big jump. But I do think when you see, the other consoles jump from 8-year-old technology to completely modern technology, that there is going to be a value there. Graphics aren't going to be the only thing that are going to sell consoles, and IGN touched on that in their discussion. But community will, and as more and more commentators migrate over to these new systems, they're going to be the best advertising for Sony and for Xbox. Is these console gamers who have millions of followers, millions of subscribers, who are going to be playing these day in and out, and they're going to get their customers, they're going to get their subscribers to switch over time. I don't think there's any way that these consoles won't have some more measure of success, and they may appear to slump, to get out of the gate slowly, kind of like a lot of people, said PlayStation wasn't that successful on launch, although in certain parts of the world it certainly was, but it certainly caught up, and I think you're going to see that happen. You're going to get a lot of initial adopters who are the big hardcore fans. Then you're going to see a big lull. And then when the price starts to drop, you're going to see a lot more people who maybe they're people who just got into the PS3 or the Xbox 360 in the last, 2 or 3 years as the prices have come down. And, 2 years into the console's life, that's when the prices are going to start dropping. And you're going to see people start migrating as other sales start to emerge. That seems to be the business trend. Or at least it would be a smart business strategy. And you know what? They may take a loss on every console. Supposedly they already do. But that's not going to be a problem because they make a substantial back in every game. I also think the Xbox Live community in terms of like the cheap mobile gaming is going to expand, and the same thing's happening with PlayStation Mobile. And as that happens, casual gamers are going to be more willing to jump in too, because you're going to be having these mobile type platforms that are cheap games. They do need to do a better job of catering to these small indie mobile developers, I think. But I do think you will see these consoles succeed. I don't think you'll get them to the levels that they were currently. But casual gamers will slowly convert over once the systems become more entrenched. And the number of hardcore gamers is probably larger than it has ever been. And I mean, like I said, I don't think it's an issue of money. Yes, the economy is tough. Times are tough. People are probably going to pick a phone before they pick a console. But when you have the most requested gift being an iPad that's over $500 one year, it's not outrageous to say that, well, why wouldn't a console be the most requested gift next year? Or, maybe not the most requested, but a highly requested gift. Because, frankly, most people don't buy an iPad every time a new one comes out. And a new one does come out every year. It sells phenomenally, but most people don't buy a new one every single year unless they're absolutely, top hardcore Apple fans. So people are still out there buying expensive products. If you got an iPad last year and you spent $500, sure, you might be pleased with that. But hey, look, it's a new gadget out, and it's way better than, your Xbox sitting on the counter or your PlayStation. Why wouldn't you jump in? I don't think people won't. I think it's going to be an appealing thing. It's going to be an appealing product, and they're going to do a good job of marketing it. And I don't think people think of yet in terms of an iPad replacing a PlayStation. Some casual gamers might, but the vast majority of people do not. It's going to take some time. They're not going to break huge records, I don't think, after maybe the first week. Who knows if this hardcore element is very large. You could see records broken in the first couple of weeks of sales. But I do think there will be a significant pullback, kind of like the Wii U is experiencing right now with the new consoles, until the price drops. As I said, I also wouldn't really look at the Wii U as an example of the next generation yet, because it's very different than what Xbox and PlayStation bring to the table. So I'm not saying that they won't fail, and I'm not saying that this might be the last generation of consoles for Xbox or for PlayStation for the reasons that the discussion on IGN mentioned. But I think they seem to look at it in the sense that the consoles would fail, and that's why it would be the last generation. And I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they will be successful. I think predicting where the gaming market will be in 5 to 10 years, though, with the rapidly changing technology in mobile is going to be hard. I think for 3-4 years, you definitely are safe. You're going to see consoles succeed. Where they're going to be in 5 years or more 10 years, that I don't think anyone can really predict, because it's hard to see, with as fast as tech changes, where we're going. But that being said, those are my thoughts. Like I said, this was in response to an IGN video. The link is in the description. Check it out if this seemed interesting. And if you came over from, if you saw that, let me know what you think in the comments below. But this is the Historical Gamer, signing out.